but very quickly I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what Spark is and why we're doing this. And you are more than welcome to reach out to me at any time to follow up. So I'm Danya. I work on marketing and community building at Spark, and we are a venture capital firm. So we actually, for the first 9 years of our existence, only invested in early stage tech startups. Sometimes just a handful of people, a semblance of a product, a really great vision. But this past summer, we also raised a growth fund to do later stage investing. So now we get to continue supporting our companies really through their life cycle and invest in companies that we missed the first or second time around. And I would just say that in general, Spark really invests in all different kinds of companies. I'm curious at some point, I think Emily is going to do intros at some point, so we'll learn more about where you guys are working. But I mean, we've invested in everything from social media companies like Twitter and Tumblr, to VR companies like Oculus, to marketplaces like 1stDibs, to ed tech. Like, do you guys categorize yourselves as ed tech?
Yeah, we're education.
Okay, so crowded. So ultimately, though, I would say we really look for entrepreneurs who are truly building something that scratches their own itch or that has a bigger purpose, that is something that can feel like magical and delightful and meaningful for the people that it serves. And that's what matters most to us. It's not necessarily about the spreadsheet with the market and the model, although that does matter at some point. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to talk to you guys afterwards more about venture capital, about Spark. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Emily, who is going to kick us off tonight with some really good content. And just sorry, I forgot that I said I was going to tell you why the hell we're even doing this in the first place. We do a whole lot of stuff over the course of the year for people who work at the startups that we've invested in to connect them to each other in really targeted ways. The thing that we hear again and again from our entrepreneurs is that they just want to know other people who are going through what they're going through. And I imagine you guys are going through a lot too at your startups. You're no different. You're working there all summer. And we also want to be really supportive of our entrepreneurs who oftentimes are learning as they go. And we can't always help with every single little thing that they need, but we can get them together and we can provide opportunities for them to learn. So we wanted to extend that to our company's interns and to interns at other startups. And I think there may even be 1 or 2 VC interns here. So that's really it for me. And now I'm turning it over to Emily.
Everyone round of applause with Danya for hosting.
So hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Emily Mithner and I'm the founder and CEO of FindSpark. So we are a community dedicated to your career success. So we do all sorts of programs all throughout the year to get you one step closer to your dream career through the people you meet and the things that you learn. So we've been producing all sorts of programs since 2011. We have tons of community members, and really the great thing about FindSpark is the actual people who are involved, the employers and the mentors who come together to help move their career forward. And we have some FindSpark community members in the audience also. And just for some examples, so numbers are always great, 200 programs, 20,000 members, but it's really about the impact that we're having on our actual community members. So just a few quick examples. This is Kristen, and Kristen participated in one of our events that we held for, bless you, Blue Apron just a few months back. So Blue Apron, you might have heard they raised a lot of money, and they needed to hire a lot of customer service folks. So we brought to them 30 really great candidates to just get to know the team and learn more about what Blue Apron does, and she was one of the people hired through that event. Aaron was an example of someone who had a tech background and wanted to use it in a creative environment, so we ended up connecting him to someone at Viacom, where he's now an analyst. This was an event that we did where we recruited lots of interns for different programs at different startups, and then this was a young woman who participated in an event we did with Warby Parker, which is a Spark company. So Warby Parker, in a similar vein, wanted to connect with people who could potentially be on their customer experience team, and she landed a job as an intern, was fast-tracked to full-time, and now she actually manages the recruitment process for customer experience. It's a nice little full-circle story with her. All right, so just a little recap of session one. So over session one, we talked about, really beginning off strong. So we talked about culture, the differences between, say, like a 200-person startup versus a smaller startup, the importance of networking, public speaking, and your online presence. And some of those themes will weave their way into this talk as well. And something about today's talk also is I want it to be very reflective and interactive. So there are going to be a lot of prompts throughout the talk where I actually really do encourage you to write things down. We handed out some index cards and pens when you walked in, and also these are just some examples of some goals that we gave for people to have an idea of how can they take what they learn and set actionable, challenging but achievable goals. So these are just some samples. So tonight, we're going to talk about how you can actually make an impact, right? So you guys are interns for the most part, so you have a fixed set of time that you can have an impact on the company, the culture, your team, your projects. So the importance of showing up and being connected within your company beyond just the day-to-day projects you're working on, and the importance of speaking up. So it can be very nerve-wracking, whether or not you're in a small company or a big company, to initiate conversations with supervisors, fellow interns, other coworkers. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to go about that. We're also super stoked to have a guest speaker with us here tonight. So we will be doing a little Q&A with him as well, and then at the end also do some goal setting and Q&A. All right, so a little background just on myself and FindSpark. So my first experiences were working at both a big corporate publishing company and a very small startup. So I had experiences at both very different environments, but similar in the sense that I never really had a set project to work on, in the sense of I was the first social media coordinator hired at this publishing company, and I was the first community manager, basically first non-technical employee hired at this startup record setter. So I got very used to taking initiative, making my own projects, and realizing the importance of being a little aggressive about making sure that you're on the same page with your supervisors and your teams about what you should be working on and what sort of goals you should be setting and achieving. So to start off with making an impact. So I'm sure, so how many of you, is this your first time working at a startup? Just curious. Okay, a handful. Okay, got about half the group. So I think to just start off, I think it's important to think about, what were you expecting before you came in, right? And your expectations come from a lot of things. They come from the job description, of course, right? They come from your meetings and the interview process with your boss, with other colleagues, and then also just your perceptions of the company, right? Is it going to be a cool office? Is it going to be small? Is it big? But I think now that you're halfway through, it's important to be reflective and think about, how have those expectations been met or not met? And I put both ways here, right? Because maybe there's some aspects that you thought, man, this is going to be amazing, this is so excited, I'm going to kill it, and you're realizing, this is something I'm struggling with. Or maybe vice versa, right? Maybe some of you were nervous about going into, being like the 5th person at a company, but you're actually doing really well. So the first prompt, just to get you thinking about how your experience has gone so far, is to think about 3 words that describe your expectations, right? So fast-paced, intimate, like what your actual projects are, right? So someone mentioned they literally do like everything, right? So maybe you thought you were going to do one thing and you're doing a lot more. But then also to describe the reality, right? So now that you're in it, right, you have a little bit longer to go. What is the experience actually turning out to be, so that you can just be kind of self-aware and recognize what the job is really like, so that you can best excel and move forward. So 3 words to describe how you thought it was going to be, and 3 words to describe the reality. And another bit of background on me, so I've been producing these sort of career programs for about 5 years now, and I'm also an adjunct professor at a couple of colleges. And one of the classes I teach, they have a retail internship. So this is at a fashion school, so they're required to have this internship. And they have to do weekly journals. And it seems very high school, but at the end, when I do exit interviews, one of the biggest things that I hear from them in terms of what they enjoyed about the class is actually being forced to stop and think about their experience, right? Because how many of you maybe feel like a few days go by or a few weeks have gone by and you're just so in it, and you're not actually really thinking about what are my accomplishments, what have my challenges been, what are my goals, right? So I think taking this time to reflect on how things are going will be really valuable, so you can wrap up the internship in a super positive way. So the first thing focusing on is goal setting. Right? So again, the job description might have said one thing, but what you're actually doing now could be another. And in startup life, again, even if you have a big company or a small company, 200 versus 5, things move so quickly, and oftentimes your goals and plans can change very quickly. So something that's extremely important is to be setting goals for yourself, both personal development-wise, and also, of course, based on the projects that you're working on. And another thing to think about is how can you sort of work backwards based on, what do you want to accomplish at the end of the internship? What will you actually put on your resume? What will those resume bullets look like? And so if you need some inspiration, for instance, you could do some trolling, stalking, researching, whatever phrase you like to use. But what are people who have had similar positions as you? What are they writing on their resumes? What are they writing on their websites? Coworkers and that sort of thing. So using all this information that we have to our advantage. And in terms of your resume, what sort of context and numbers do you want to see, right? So the big thing with resumes and what will set you apart, and our third and final session will focus a lot about resumes and how to position the experience you've gotten. But a big thing is to think about is, if you're, say, a marketing intern at a startup, think about what every marketing intern at a startup has done. They've run the social media, they've done email marketing, maybe they've done events, right? So if you just put those things on your resume is going to look like every other marketing intern at a startup. So start thinking now about how your bullets, how are the things that you've accomplished going to differentiate you from other people? So saying that you planned 3 events with attendance of over 50 people at each, that's a lot more impressive sounding than just saying planned community events. Right, so analyze, X amount of data per week or per month, so think about what those sort of end bullets will look like and work backwards. So the next prompt, if you don't have them already, and some of you hopefully are lucky enough to have some very set goals from your supervisor and your team members, but if you haven't thought about them in a while, think about them now. And both, again, personal professional development and of course work and project related. So how many of you would consider yourselves introverts? Just show of hands. Just a handful? Okay, yeah, I was like, it took a while for them to go up, right? So for instance, an introverted person's goal might be to present at a meeting or to approach a coworker that's not in their department. So that's an example of a professional development goal. And then of course work and project related, what are the main things you aim to get done? And a good thing with goals too is you want to make sure that there are milestones along the way so you can check in on your progress. Because if you're just thinking about that one big goal at the end and you're only going to be satisfied when that one big goal is hit, it's going to be more of a struggle throughout, right? So what sort of checkpoints can you give yourself along the way, right? So if you're planning events, like can you give yourself RSVP goals? Can you give yourself goals of what sort of speakers you want to get involved in, that sort of thing? So, and I think for both, aiming for 2 to 3 goals, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself too. You want to be able to focus. You only have a few weeks left. So another big part of this is, as the title said, getting shit done, right? So you guys are all pretty early in your careers, so this is a really good time to be thinking about what type of environment do you excel in? And are you excelling in the environment that you're in? So self-awareness is key in this phase of your career. How are things going, and what do you feel like is actually sets you up for success? So really simple examples. Are you a morning person? Or are you a late person, an evening person? When do you feel most productive during the day? I know a lot of people like to use the strategy of, swallowing the frog before you start, right? So doing like the hard thing, something about eating a frog, because that's gross, right? So you do that first, and then everything else is easy, right? So maybe you've realized that, hey, yeah, you are like that, right? Because if you put the big thing off to the end of the day, then you're rushing, so maybe you realize, you know what, every day when I get in, I'm gonna try to check that one big thing off my list, and once that's off my list, everything else will be additional, right? Also, just what sort of productivity and tools do you like to use? Like, are you a notebook person? Are you really having a great time integrating into some of their project management tools? I have some of my favorites on an upcoming slide. And also, who of you worked well with on your team? right? Because you're not going to, you hopefully will get along with everyone, but you might realize there's a certain type of personality that you mesh with really well. So thinking about all of these things to determine what sort of work style and environment do you do well in. So when you move on to potentially maybe continue on full-time in this company or to look for other internships, you can look for hints of, this culture actually seems very XYZ, so I want to aim for this. Or, this seems too similar to my last startup, which I actually didn't really do well in. So start thinking about self-awareness in that sense. And these are just some of my favorite productivity tools. Have anybody heard of any of these? Do you guys use any of these at where you at? Does anyone use these for which one?
Boomerang and Sidekick.
Okay, nice. What about you?
Asana.
Asana is amazing, right? Life-changing, I think.
We use Asana, Sidekick, or Order.
Nice. Yeah.
Trello and Momentum.
Okay. I know.
Trello.
Trello. Trello. Cool. So, and these are things that you can also be using for your personal goals as well, too, right? Especially if you're how many of you are seniors? Just curious. Okay, so you just graduated, and or you're going to be a senior? Okay, going to be a senior, right? So I mean, tools like Streak, Rapportive, Sidekick, Boomerang, those are great for applying for jobs, right? And so when you're applying for your next internships, the bottom half of these are basically like kind of personal CRMs and things you can use to see if people are opening up your emails. Also great tools to, in terms of when, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but when you're reaching out to your boss or other colleagues, you can know like, oh my God, he didn't even open my email yet, right? So good things to check out. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is just management and being managed, because I think everybody loves the phrase micromanaging, right? You've all heard of the phrase micromanaging, and I think that's the one thing that people associate with, like, everyone hates being micromanaged, right? Nobody likes, or a helicopter manager, right? They hover over you. But something that's really important to realize is, number one, there is no one management style that works for everyone. And number two, off of that is, there isn't one management style that should be used on you for every single project. Right, so what I mean by that is, for instance, what was your background, remind me? Like, what was your job title when you came in? Finance marketing, okay, so that is what you are awesome at, that's what your degree is in, your background is in, and then they ask you to do something a little different, right?
Secondary CRM.
Okay, so you've been killing it on the first part, right? And like, they don't need to bother you, you're set up, you're good to go, but they give you this new project, and I'm just gonna pretend. Maybe that's just not something you've had as much experience with. And because you were rocking at the first thing that you had going on, they leave you alone for this as well. But you're realizing, like, I don't actually know as much about this, and on the inside you're just thinking, I actually wish I had more management, I wish I had more guidance, and that's okay, right? Because there are some things that you should have more guidance on, and there are some things that it's nice to kind of have autonomy for. So the next thing that I want you guys to think about is, what are some things that you're working on now currently, and do you wish that you had more guidance on these projects? Do you feel like you have enough? Or do you feel like you actually want more autonomy? I saw someone asking the questions ahead of time. They said, I actually wish I had more autonomy. So think about your projects, and we'll kind of go back to this prompt later, but is there anything you're currently working on where you're like, I wish we had more check-ins, or I wish I had more of a structure, or that they sent me to a class or something like that? So the next big section of this is really focused on the people. And beyond your day-to-day duties of what you're required to get done, your projects, talking about how you can really get involved in the culture and your company beyond that. So I was talking with Logan here, who I guess technically met through one of my connections from 5 years ago, almost now. So his name is John Exley, and he was interning at a startup at the time called Hashable, which is no longer in existence. But I had connected with him when I had just started FindSpark, and we planned some intern events together. And through those intern events, there are people at those events who are still connected today. And actually, she just was mentioning some people she met through something John held, and I thought, oh, I know all those people. I keep in touch with them. So it's so important that you get connected into your company beyond, say, just your direct supervisor. So as your time is coming to a close, think about what in terms of events and activities and culture can you get yourself into so that you can really get to know everyone and people can get to know you, right? So I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, it's all about who you know, right? But I think thinking about it's all who knows you is just as important, right? So you really want to show your face, and that's where a lot of the connections are made. So things like company outings. So are there happy hours? Are there trips? Are there retreats or offsites? Are there intern-specific programs? How many of you are at a company where they have programming specifically for you, just out of curiosity? Okay, a couple. All right, so things like that, things like this, of course. Are there any upcoming meetings or events where you can be a fly on the wall? A great way to stand out is to show you're not just interested in that one thing you're working on, but you're interested in how the company works as a whole. So, can I sit in on that pitch meeting? Can I sit in on that big marketing meeting, that big engineering meeting? And then also, off-site conferences and trade shows. So you had mentioned when you were RSVP, right, Carmen, right? So one of your first days you were at Northside Innovation Festival, right? I saw for your company. Was that, no? Oh, just kidding. I read a blog post from your company blog post. So, if you have a chance to go to represent your company somewhere, right? So maybe that's a trade show, maybe that's a conference, an event, something like Logan is holding, being able to go out there and say, like, I am an intern at XYZ. One of the biggest things that my supervisor said at my first job is they loved how I was always thinking about how I could connect Sterling Publishing, my company, to other people. So whenever I would go out to events, I would try to make connections. Oh, like this biz dev person should meet this person, or that sort of thing. So the next prompt, what can you do to add to the culture? So what events, programs, meetings can you get involved in? So are there things that you hear about that are going on that you can ask, hey, I would love to get involved or to help plan? And are there any events that maybe you want to suggest? So if there's a couple of interns, only a couple of you said there are actual intern programs, are any of you at a company where you can say, hey, before the end of the summer, I think some of the interns and we would love to do a lunch and learn, or we would love to, do a sort of networking event with, ourselves and the bigger, everyone in the company. And taking that initiative, like picking on Logan again, to have an intern project that's not necessarily again related to your specific day-to-day, but involves you in the company as a whole, is a really, really, really great way to stand out and to make sure that they remember you after you've left. So then, of course, there is the startup community, and hello to all those watching on live stream. So we have people in Boston, LA, San Francisco, so every community is a little bit different, but there are so many ways to get involved beyond just your company, and you should really take advantage of those while you're interning and you have this great opportunity. So, Danya and I were talking about how we met, and it was also about 5 years ago, and we can kind of draw the line between one meetup hosted by a friend and how we got connected there, and we've just sort of intertwined in different projects in different ways since then. So that the connections you make while you're interning, while you're young, while you're still in school, when you're graduating, those are people that will help you throughout the rest of your career. And it's not just about meeting the CEO or the head of engineering or the partner, but all of you are going places and you're going to be doing really great things. So remember to, of course, connect with your peers as well. So events. There are so many events. How many of you have heard of Gary's Guide? Right, this is going to be big, right? There's like 1 million newsletters, and actually in the hub that Danya created for this event series, we put some of our favorite newsletters and places to find events. But then also like digital conversations, right? So getting involved on social media, Twitter, Medium, GitHub, you know, all these different sites, of course, that can be just as valuable as meeting people in person, right? And one of the big things that we talked about in the first lesson is really balancing the offline and the online. So once, for instance, you've all met today, right? So you're all gonna leave here with a bunch more connections. So, you know, adding people on Twitter, adding people on LinkedIn so you have that way to stay in touch over time is important. And again, making connections for your team. You know, even though you might be just an intern, you all know people, right? You all met really great people here tonight. So, you know, that doesn't mean making the assumption that every connection you might have found is a great connection, and of course you want to be careful, but, you know, going to your supervisor and boss and saying, hey, I connected with this person, I think they'd really love, you know, they'd really love what we're doing, setting up intros when possible. If you can become a connector yourself, even in a small way, you'll be seen as a great resource, and again, another great way to stand out. So also wanted to talk about the side hustle. So how many of you have a side hustle or side project, something you're working on? What are you working on?
Yeah, I'm president of the Kairos Society. They're a group that is broken up all around the world, but we have a New York base, and we bring together a community of young founders of startups, age below 26, and they usually have some sort of grant, business plan, competition win under their belt, and then from that lower limit to about like a Series A, and then some of the companies that we have there high.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of like a portfolio of kind of incubating companies through community events and community networking.
That's amazing, very cool. And so someone else raise their hand? Sure.
I'm at Venio, which is a startup company kind of that does tailoring. So you like send us your sweater or whatever, and we'll like fix it for you. And it just is like taking away the middleman and making it easier. We're gonna launch in like September.
Cool. Anyone else thinking about starting something on the side? What do you got?
So one of my friends and I actually, our deal was if we didn't get internships this summer, we'd start our own company, and we actually have so much of the idea founded that even though we both got jobs, we're so set on starting it next semester, and the fact that we're both in startups actually ended up being such a blessing because we're learning so many of the pitfalls and the organizational techniques and kind of what our founders have gone through. So it's given us a lot of tools.
That's great. Yeah, so, you know, I think this is a really great time while you have the support network of a team, you guys have jobs, right? But to use your time wisely and think about starting something. Again, when you think about who you'll be compared to in the job market, especially in the startup world. Startups, if you want to continue to be in startups, like they want to see that you are proactive and that you've taken initiative, and what better way to do that than to say, hey, of course I've had internships at these great companies, but I've also done my own thing. You know, and anything from an app, from a blog, to organizing events. Those are all seen as really, really valuable, and again, a great way to differentiate yourself. So if you're thinking about starting a side hustle, just start it. And, you know, a few reasons just to start. Number one is that things take a long time, right? So building a company, building something on the side, it's always probably going to take longer than you think it is, so it's good to just start instead of waiting till you feel like you have every single thing nailed down. And also, of course, like inspiration is going to come and go, but the important thing is like to give yourself a long period of time to stick with it. So to really give yourself that shot. But this summer is a great chance to start that side hustle. And then the other thing to think about is your own connection. So how many of you have already been to, say, like some other startup events this summer, just out of curiosity? Okay, a handful. So, you know, I think people like to get obsessed with people they don't know. So, oh, I don't know any big VCs, I don't know any big tech people, or, you know, I haven't met the big wigs at my company yet. But I think we often ignore people that we already have in our own network. So, you know, thinking about professors, classmates, colleagues that you have connected with, fellow interns, and utilizing those connections now while you're here, while you have something exciting and cool to talk about, your experience, and also to bounce ideas off of them. So if you are maybe struggling on a certain aspect of your internship, or you are looking for some advice about how to go about something, just starting with your own network and people who you've already met. So the next prompt is to think about setting a goal for yourself of what can you do outside of work, right? So kind of picking from that list we just went through. So, are there more events? So a good chunk of you didn't raise your hand in terms of going to a startup event, so you should all go to a startup event before the summer is over, or start a side hustle. And of course, just look through your own connections. And one of my really awesome LinkedIn tips that I only found out recently myself, but did you know you can download all of your LinkedIn connections as a CSV? Do you guys know that? Does anyone? Got a few head nods? So this is really cool for a handful of reasons. One, it's just kind of cumbersome to search through your LinkedIn connections. So downloading them all, you have their emails, their titles, where they work. So if you're wondering, okay, like, do I know other people in startups, or also just a good way to keep track of people when they've moved around and maybe you didn't notice. So I would say everyone go home, download your LinkedIn connections and look through them. And also knowing that you have this ability now, I would say this is one of my favorite reasons to really encourage people, even if you've met just briefly at an event like this, just connect with everyone and just say, it was great meeting you. Always send a custom invite message, because nothing is more generic or lazy looking than a generic LinkedIn message. So take the 2 seconds to say, hey, it was great meeting you at the Spark Capital event. If possible, adding a little note about what you spoke about. But connecting with all those people, because you never know, again, where they're going to go, what they'll do next, and how you might be able to collaborate in the future. So the third and final part of tonight's talk is focused on speaking up. So thank you for letting me put you all on the spot and give your little introductions. Something that I believe is incredibly, incredibly important is being able to have the confidence to talk about yourself and the work that you do. So I realize that most of you would literally rather be dead than standing where I am right now, right? Because most people are more afraid of dying than public speaking. It's a fact. But you might not have to give talks or speeches in the future, but you do have to talk to colleagues, talk to your bosses, present your case, defend your reasonings for doing certain things. So, and also as you get closer to closing up your internship, you want to make sure that you're connecting with your colleagues and especially your supervisor about your performance. So making sure that you're making those meetings and getting on their schedules. So of course, touching base with your boss. So just out of curiosity, how many of you have scheduled kind of structured check-ins with a supervisor? So only about 4 of you, right? So that means everybody else, you have to work hard, right? You have to put it on yourself to make sure you're getting that time, to make sure you're on the same page. How many of you have met with coworkers that aren't involved in maybe what you're working on, but just other coworkers? Okay, a good amount, great. Anybody meet people at an event and then meet up with them after? Like get coffee with people after chatting with them at events a little bit? Okay, or a lot of people, great. And of course, meeting up with other side hustlers and interns. So, when you're thinking about these meetings, and of course some being more structured than others, but say let's take for instance these check-in meetings. So most of you are saying you don't have formal time periods for checking in with your boss. So how do you make sure when you do get those meetings that they're actually effective? So some things just to think about, especially if you're the one who initiates the meeting, send the Google Calendar invite, right? Because you don't want them to forget. And the worst thing is like you show up and they don't, right? So sending a meeting invite, giving them prep time. So knowing that you're probably in a busy work environment no matter where you're at. You don't want to say, hey, it's my last day tomorrow, can we catch up, right? If you want to have a productive meeting and you want to give them things to think about, give them time. Set an agenda if you're meeting with a boss. So like, what do you actually want to go over? So going back and thinking about some of those prompts that we did earlier, is there a project that you want to focus on specifically to talk about how you can get more guidance to make sure that you're really accomplishing the goals they want you to do? And then, these the next two, doing your research and coming with notes and questions. So, if you have the opportunity to meet up with someone after meeting them briefly and you want to say, pick their brain, right? That's a phrase younger people like to use a lot. So for instance, you want to meet up with Danya, right? So Danya's time is really valuable. Everyone's time is really valuable. So making sure that you come prepared with good questions, and do not waste their time asking them questions that you can find the answers to through Google. right? So being really thoughtful, being respectful of their time, and being respectful of their time just in the sense of, again, being prepared, being on time, but also in terms of etiquette, just like watching the clock and that sort of thing, because it can be kind of awkward if you're with someone and you're feeling like it's going over, but the person's just talking and talking and talking. But on the other end, the great thing about asking to pick someone's brain is most people want to help you and they enjoy talking about themselves, right? So it might go the other end is, they might be talking and talking and talking and you're like, oh my God, I wonder if they realize they've been talking for an hour. So if you're the one to arrange a meeting, just being respectful, like sitting, I always like to give the tip of sit near a clock. So you can look at a clock without looking at your watch. Even if you have the Apple Watch, it's still, it's obvious. So, sit somewhere where you can be mindful of the time. And, just to be very actionable, send good meeting invites too. So these are just some qualities I think of a good meeting invite. Of course, having a location, I think 45-minute time increments are usually a good rule of thumb. So if you're ever in that awkward situation, if you're like, you said I could meet for coffee, but I'm not sure how long, 45 minutes is like less than an hour, more than a half hour, and still be productive. Always put cell numbers. I think this is especially for, if you're meeting with someone, again, like from an event or somebody who you're not in their office, just in case something comes up. And also just a thing that I like to do is let people modify the event. So in the case that something comes up, they want to change the location, or if, say, it's your boss or a coworker, they can just easily change the timing without having to do a lot of back and forth. Okay, so I covered this in the last session, but because there's a lot of you here and this is new to you, I wanted to make sure to focus on these things also. So in terms of my experience teaching, talking to a lot of young people and hearing them introduce themselves, pitches, all that good stuff, these are some of the biggest things that I think you can fix to become a better public speaker. So number one is your handshake. I'll let you all practice now, and it seems silly, but how many of you have shaken someone's hand and just felt like really awkward because they get like the fishy, floppy handshake? Right? So please, have a good handshake. I think a good rule of thumb is if you feel like you're shaking a little too hard, it's probably perfect. I'll let you all practice right now. Go ahead, shake the hand of someone next to you. And if they're weak, make them do it again. I definitely had some weak handshakes on the way in. I know it seems silly, but it's important. First impressions are everything. The next thing is posture and body language. So it is a fact that people care more about how you look than what you're actually saying. Does anyone remember that Super Bowl commercial for Tide to Go pens, the guy in the interview? So it was this commercial where a guy's in an interview and the one, on the job hunt had a big stain on his shirt. And every time he started talking, the stain just went blah, 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 like that, right? Because the interviewer was just looking at the stain the whole time, right? So that's an example of dress, of course, but if you're hunched over, if you are wringing your hands, you're moving your rings, you're twirling your hair, fidgeting, moving back and forth, all these little things are going to come across as insecure and not confident, and they're going to make the person you're talking to feel weird, right? So think about making yourself big, standing up straight, and especially in meetings. People are watching you at all times. Even if you think you're just in the back, you're just a fly in the wall, people notice if you're slouched over, if your face is in your hand. So just be very cognizant of that at all times when you're in the workplace, and especially, of course, when you're meeting with people. The next thing is filler words. So how many of you are aware of what your filler word of choice is? What is like? Anyone like? Right? That's probably a lot of people. Anyone have a weird one that they know of? Like, as. It is so important to eliminate these. And not just when you're in a situation where you're presenting or you're talking to someone important, just in life. You should try to get rid of them. And it's difficult, right? You've been using these filler words for probably about 20 years or so of your life, right? So I think the best way, and even you'll hear some filler words of my own, and I do this for a living. So I think the best way to work on it proactively is to tell whoever you spend the most time with, 3 to 4 of your friends or family, boyfriend, girlfriend, tell them that you're working on it and give them permission to like slap you or give you a little hit anytime you hear it. And you really do have to proactively work on it to fix it. And one of my biggest tips with getting rid of the filler words is speaking slowly. They're called filler words for a reason. People do not like silence. It's uncomfortable. But it can actually be really powerful. I've thrown some dramatic pauses in here and there, right? But so, don't be in the mode where you feel like you have to talk so quickly to get it in. Like, let yourself take the time to speak, again, confidently, slowly, especially in situations with supervisors. And then the next thing is energy. How to stand out. Show that you're passionate about what you're working on. Use your hands. Be excited. Don't be ashamed. I think a lot of people get into the mode of like, oh, I don't want to seem too, in your face or that sort of thing. But if you're excited about a project, the company, an idea, let that shine through, because that's going to stand apart from other people who are just kind of trudging along. And again, energy also really goes into posture. And again, the fact that people care more about how you're saying things and how you look than what you're actually saying. So if you sound really confident and excited about something, then that will really come across and make a difference. So one of the final prompts, so who will you meet with? So you all have about 6 or so weeks left of your internship, right about then. Who are some people that you want to make it a goal to talk with? That can be a boss, that can be a supervisor, that can be someone really cool at your company who doesn't work in your department, but you've just been admiring them from afar. Think about that and start making the plans now, because you don't want time to pass you by, the internship be over, and then it's just a little bit harder to get in touch with these people, right? And of course, so the final workshop in this series will be all about maintaining your connections and how to continue them on after you leave, but it's way better to meet as many people as you can while you're there. So again, making an impact, so setting goals for yourself and also using this as a time to reflect on where you do well. Showing up and getting connected, so beyond just the day-to-day, how can you stand out as someone who's really invested and involved in the company and the culture, and then speaking up. So how can you make sure that you're connecting with people, sharing ideas, and getting feedback so that you're remembered after you leave? Because at the end of the day, of course, your skill set matters, but again, it's who knows you, right? So how can you fully take advantage of all these people that you're with, and really just the tech community at large? Because your connections and your network, and I think people like to think about connections and it's kind of negative, it sounds superficial, but really just thinking of it as your own supportive community. Starting now to create your own network of people, because that network of people, that is the most valuable thing you will ever have in your career, is the people who you're surrounded by. So you want to start building that network now.